Oh, hey, welcome to the Podcast Whisper.
Listen closely, and you'll hear the sound of the Podcast Whisperer. David Allen challenges you to learn what it takes to be a world-class podcaster, because everyone has a story to tell.
This week, I'm reviewing Podcast Reviews Podcast.
Welcome to the iTunes Reviews Podcast, the podcast where I review the iTunes reviews of this podcast. Obviously, this is the first episode, so there's not going to be any reviews. But so send in your reviews, and we'll try to do this every week. I'll try to see what your reviews, how good they are compared to other reviews. So we'll see you next week.
I wanted to talk about this episode because it's so interesting. It's such an interesting concept. And I know, so let this marinate for a couple minutes. So I saw the review come over for this, asking for this show to be reviewed. At first, I thought it was a joke. And I'm like, this is kind of crazy. And at first, I was like, this is actually kind of dumb, to be honest with you. But then I really thought about it. And I was like, you know what? This is actually kind of funny and cool. It's in the comedy portion of iTunes, where it belongs. And he's 13 episodes in. So I'm guessing every week is what he says that he reviews the reviews on his podcast. So follow along. I know at first it was hard for me too. So the podcast is called Podcast Reviews Podcast. So like in his introduction that you heard before, he reviews the reviews that are left about that podcast. I know, it's so mind-blowing because it's so simple, but also so very fun at the same time. Take a listen.
Welcome to the Podcast Reviews Podcast. I don't know if that name is a little bit too palindromic. I'm just trying to find a thing that isn't referencing iTunes directly. If I just say reviews podcast, that doesn't make any sense. It has the iTunes reviews. That's what I was really focused on. And I'm still going to be using the iTunes reviews. So I'm just having a hard time figuring out what to actually call this. But for now, I'm submitting it as the Podcast Reviews Podcast. That could change. And actually, if you submit a review, if it does go out to iTunes, I don't know yet. We'll have to wait till this episode goes through. But if it does go out to iTunes, then you can leave a review and say, hey, I like the name of the podcast, or I could change the name of the podcast. You know, you can use reviews to leave feedback, like that. So we'll see if this works. I don't know how long it takes. It might be another week or so, but hopefully this will be all under the rug, and we'll see you next week.
So what I love about this show, though, is that he is growing through his frustrations, which is great. He's growing through. I mean, if you listen to the first episode, he's 13 episodes in now, and this was episode 7, I believe. And he's growing through it. I'm not sure about the name, but he's also including you, the audience, which is pretty amazing to me because most of us as podcasters, we get in our mindset where, again, I've told you 100 times, the universe didn't give your vision to somebody else. It gave your vision to you. So what I'm feeling in this show is that he's growing through you. He's helping you help him grow, which implies the name of, the Podcast Reviews Podcast. So I actually enjoy listening to this. And I'm telling you, at first I was like, this is crazy. This is really, really stupid. But I'm circling back around to the beginning where I said that. And now I'm absolutely in love with the idea. For him to be brave enough to put it out to the listeners to say, listen, leave reviews. I'm just going to read your reviews. It's absolutely hysterical. Check this out.
There'll be no reviews this week, of course, because the service I signed up for only sends me monthly emails. But in the meantime, I did get an email from Apple letting me know that you could tell my listeners to use Siri on their Apple iPhones, which hopefully you have. So you can actually just say, Siri, play Podcast Reviews Podcast. And subscribe to this show, and Siri will automatically do that for you. And then you can just go on there and rate and review the show. So use Siri as a surrogate, and it's easy to just rate and review. That's pretty important. So we'll do that, and I'll see you next week.
This is a teaching/learning moment. I'm glad he actually brought this up because no other podcaster has brought it up thus far. We do now use Siri. So you could say, hey, Siri, play the Podcast Whisperer on your phone or any podcast that you listen to and tell it to subscribe to it, and it will do that for you. So thank you for bringing that up because most people don't know that. Most listeners don't know that. You can use your phone just like Alexa and Siri as well to use that to tell Siri and Alexa what you want to hear. Now, as far as the monthly thing that you subscribe to, I'm not sure if you know this or not, but you can check your iTunes reviews right through iTunes directly and just click on the newest ones and it'll show you what was left. Currently, right now, you have 8. So, if you have 8 today and 9 tomorrow, clearly you got a new one. You may already know that. I'm just saying based on that episode that I just played, you said you get a monthly email. So I wouldn't wait for the reviews to be emailed to you. I'd definitely go hunt them out. What I do love about him, though, is that he's consistent. Check this out.
Another week, no reviews. 2 weeks, we'll have reviews, though. The reason I want to keep this weekly is because I heard it's the second most important thing to have a consistent schedule. And so even though there's not any reviews this week, I think it's more important to have the feed always update to keep the listeners engaged and aware. If you have too long of a break, then people fall off. So the most important thing, of course, for a podcast is for you to rate and review it. So go to iTunes, leave a review, a rating, a star rating, and I'll review it in a couple weeks when we get that next email. And we'll see you next week.
Another learning, teachable moment. That's great. He's absolutely correct. And that's what I'm saying. Most people are not doing the research when they do these episodes, but he did. He clearly did. And he's growing through you. And I think that's amazing. I think that him saying, oh, I'm doing this, I'm trying to figure this out. I think that's great. This is a great show to show the progression, to show the understanding and frustration of podcasting and how you're doing things. I went to his Twitter page. He has 1 person following him. Now I'm 2. I'm number 2 following him. So he needs to get more of a social media presence, which I'm sure he will. Here's my challenges to you, though. Say your name. Who are we connecting with? We're not the Podcast Reviews podcast. Hosted by whom, though? The reviewer? That's how you have your name listed. Who are you? Maybe you want to stay anonymous. That's okay. Maybe it's not about you, the host, but people need somebody they can connect with. They need somebody to say, oh, I'm listening to so-and-so, the Podcast Reviews podcast. So I would definitely try to, even if you make up a name, actually, yes, you want to always make up a name. You never want to Google yourself unless you're in the company of a life coach, and try to keep your personal life separate from your business. Absolutely. That is a lesson I can give to you. But the lesson that we've taken away from this show is you can use Siri to listen to podcasts, and you want to stay consistent, even if you have nothing to talk about. Clearly, you want to stay consistent like this guy does. Great show. I would recommend it. I truly see a potential in this. I truly do. And I really hope that everybody goes into this with an open mind, because I'm telling you, at first, I was not going to review this show. I was going to delete it and move on to the next one. But here at the Podcast Whisperer, we have to give everybody a chance. Even this, because I find this brilliant. You may not like it. You may feel this is a waste of episode. I don't feel that way, though. I feel like this was very educational, because in the short segments that he has, the longest segment he has is 2 minutes. In those short segments, he has taught us 2 things that most people don't even know. So he's learning and sharing that knowledge with you, which, what more can we ask for? That's what I'm here for, is to share the knowledge that I've learned. And I have been reminded, I knew these things, but I have been reminded of these things that I do not use. So thank you so much, Podcast Reviews podcast. I hope your show grows. I'm going to subscribe and listen. I can't wait to hear what else comes out of your podcast. I am loving the response that I'm getting from the Podcast Whisperer. Thank you, everybody, for listening. You can also, speaking of reviews, you can go to iTunes and leave us a wonderful review. That would be great. The reviews are coming in. I don't read them like this guy does, but maybe I'll have him on the show to read some of my reviews. Who knows? Just listen to us in the future. But hit us up on Twitter at The Pod Whisperer and submit your podcast at reviewmypod.com.